your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition with Jeanette Roche.
Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. Thanks so much for joining us for a look back at what's been making headlines in Alberta. Jurors deliberated for just 3 hours before finding 3 men guilty for their roles in the 2022 highway blockade at the Coutts border crossing. The trial for Alex Van Herk, George Jansen, and Marco Van Hugenbos lasted just under 2.5 weeks. On Tuesday at around 8:30 p.m., 6 men and 6 women read the verdict. The 3 were found guilty of 1 count each of mischief over $5,000 for their involvement in a protest over COVID-19 government restrictions. The accused were free to leave the courthouse but could face 10 years in prison and will be sentenced at a later date. We spoke with Marco Van Hugenbos, who says he wasn't surprised about the verdict but still stands behind what he did.
I believe I did the right thing. There are regrets in relation to things or how things went or decisions I made, but there is there can be no regret for what Coutts was and for what has come out of Coutts. And people can struggle with the tactics, but the cause was right. And look what we knew then versus what we know now in relation to the COVID regime in this province and what has come out of Coutts, the conviction is stronger than ever.
Van Hugenbos is a former Fort Macleod town councillor. He is married with 4 children. He and his co-accused will return to court July 22nd to hear a sentencing date. Now, just after the verdict was read, Alex Van Herk told reporters outside the courthouse that he too stands behind what he did at the border, but says the judicial system simply did its job.
Our judicial system did its job. Do we agree with it? No, we can never agree with it, especially on the fight that we're fighting. The act of mischief, I guess mischief was caused in Coutts. And if the jury deems us as be participants of that and the leaders of that, then I guess I'll stand for that. I just hope there's accountability coming forward from this for the politicians, that why we had to go there. There's a reason we went there. I mean, what was happening in our country, in our province at that time that forced good people to do uncivil things to be heard? We tried every other avenue. We tried contacting our MLAs or every level of government. They weren't listening. So it's sad that we have to take them kind of measures to be heard, and I guess accountability needs to be there. So I guess, I'm proud of it.
The Liberal government says it met all its fiscal goals in Tuesday's federal budget. That includes keeping the $40 billion deficit from rising, even as it introduced tens of billions of dollars in new spending. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation was not impressed with Minister Freeland's budget. Chris Sims, the Alberta director for the CTF, says the feds will be hiking taxes, increasing spending, and allowing debt interest charges to be out of control.
We are now, you dear taxpayer, are now spending more than $1 billion per week on the interest charges on the debt. So the federal debt, the entire debt, is now more than $1 trillion. To put that number into perspective, if you started counting loonies right now, it would take you 30,000 years to count to $1 trillion. That's how much trouble we're in. That's how much debt we're in. We have to pay interest on that $1 trillion. And now that interest costs us more than what we spend on health care in Canada.
Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas was also not impressed with it and explains why.
I think really what stuck out to me about this budget is, first off, we need to acknowledge that it's the 9th year that Trudeau has promised to balance the budget and hasn't. It's another deficit being incurred by Canadians. And of course, we know that the amount that is spent just on servicing that debt alone is equivalent to the amount that the government collects in GST per year. So imagine that. All of the GST that we're paying is just going to service our debt. But I think what's also important to understand is that, of course, this is more debt, yes, but also higher taxes and higher costs for Canadians. And right now, Canadians are squeezed and they just can't afford more. I recently got a phone call from a mom who was a part of a mom's group, and she shared with me that the overwhelming conversation taking place was just around affordability, whether it was gas or groceries or diapers for children or formula for babies. Families are really hard done by and just having a really difficult time making ends meet. And unfortunately, Budget 2024 is only going to add to the debt load that individual households are experiencing and the difficult times that they're having.
On the other side of the break, we take a closer look at a new model developed in Alberta to help those battling mental health and addictions. With the number of opioid deaths in the province over the past year, Alberta is putting $5 million towards developing a new program for those struggling with addictions. But is it the right type of program for those most vulnerable? I sat down with the legislative correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, to find out more.
What they call the Alberta model is basically the idea that addicts should be sort of run up this system where the end goal is recovery. The end goal is to break the addiction, get them into treatment, return them to society and jobs and housing and all that sort of thing. And it's obviously a very controversial idea. There's lots of debate in addictions and mental health circles about the best way to approach people, treat people, meet them where they're at, that sort of thing. But for the last few years, since Jason Kenney became premier, really, Alberta's been pushing this idea of recovery-oriented treatment quite strongly. And so this center that they're funding is going to be sort of a research and analysis organization. What is the research telling us about the best way to tackle addiction? What is the if you have a recovery center or an addictions facility doing treatment, this Crown Corporation might do an analysis of their work. So it does seem to be framed sort of within this Alberta model, this recovery-oriented model that I spoke about. And this has also led to some controversy because, as I say, there's the big debate over this. So is the government, funding a research center that's going to come back with just research that's, ideologically friendly towards them? And Dan Williams, the addictions and mental health minister, said, no, they'll be allowed to do and publish research that won't align with our political priorities necessarily. But of course, that hasn't totally allayed some of the concerns that folks have. So it'll be interesting to see what they do when they get up and running. There is some suggestion that they might partner with, say, the University of Calgary, the University of Alberta, University of Lethbridge on some of these research projects. So remains to be seen exactly what that's going to look like, still in the early phases of it, but certainly a part of this much larger scheme of the Alberta perspective on recovery.
Mm-hmm. Since last September, Saskatchewan has been fighting in court to preserve its pronoun rules in schools, which says that those 15 years old and younger must get parental consent to use different pronouns or names in school. And it looks like the Alberta government is now an intervener in this case, so they'll be making their own legal arguments about it at some point in the future. So Tyler, can you maybe tell us more about this?
Yeah, so this, as you say, has been running since about September. And what happened is a little bit complicated, but basically Saskatchewan announced this policy. They were sued by sort of the Pride Center in Regina, I think it was. And the Pride Center got an injunction basically saying that the government cannot implement this legislation, this policy change, until the courts decide whether it's constitutional. Saskatchewan responded by passing legislation called the Parents' Bill of Rights, and they invoked the notwithstanding clause, the section of the Constitution that allows a government to override charter protections. So that could have been the end of it. But what the Pride Center did is they brought in new legal arguments. They said, well, we've made all these arguments under sections of the charter that can be overridden by the notwithstanding clause. But now they're arguing that this also violates section 12 of the charter, which prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. And section 12 of the charter cannot be overridden by the notwithstanding clause. So this is a new legal avenue. And so earlier this year, I think February or January, the court said, well, even though the notwithstanding clause has been used, even though this bill has become law, there is this line of legal argument that needs to be considered. So it is going to be heard, I believe, by the Court of Appeal in Saskatchewan. Now, Saskatchewan's not very happy about that. They're saying, well, we already dealt with this case. We passed the notwithstanding clause. We passed the legislation. There's no legal argument there. That's not what the court thinks at this point. And so Alberta's getting in on that part of the argument. And you can imagine why, because Alberta has similar rules proposed. They have not been made into policy or legislation yet. These were announced back in January by the Premier. Very similar, a little bit more strict actually than Saskatchewan's, but very similar. So you can imagine that Alberta's thinking, oh, well, once we make this law, we're going to be facing a legal argument about it in court. So this is a way for them to sort of make their own arguments in a different jurisdiction to some extent on their views on the pronoun policy, but they're also going to be arguing about the notwithstanding clause and the use of the notwithstanding clause, and whether, because they're concerned that if Saskatchewan loses this case, they might be in a position where they cannot protect basically their own legislative agenda. So a bit complicated, a bit of a long rambling answer there, but it's essentially, I think, a setup for what we're going to see in Alberta at some point in the courts when this pronoun policy that Danielle Smith has announced ends up becoming law or regulation, or at any rate coming into effect.
Thank you for that, Tyler. We're out of time, but we appreciate having you on today.
It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Alberta's official opposition party is looking for their next leader, and the race is on. After the break, we sit down with one of the NDP's frontrunners. The Alberta NDP will be choosing their new leader on June 22nd, and the former mayor of Calgary, Naheed Nenshi, has thrown his hat into the political ring to join the leadership race. He recently shared with BCN's Naveen Day that he wants to help people see how the New Democrats share Albertans' values. Take a look.
I have a very different view of this. I think that issues of left and right are issues that are best left to political scientists and journalists. They don't really make a big difference in everyday people's lives. What really is important is finding the values that people believe in and figuring out how to make sure that we are speaking to those values. And the important thing that I've learned about the New Democrat Party, today's New Democrat Party in Alberta, is that in fact it is already speaking to those values. When we think about strong delivery of public services by the public sector, when we think about looking after the most vulnerable, not punching down on them, giving people a hand up at the moment they need it, fostering a strong economy with a solid eye on the books, all of that, while we're dealing with ensuring that every single Albertan has a life of dignity and prosperity on this land. When you think about those are things that most Albertans believe in. But they're also things that the NDP believes in. And I think the challenge has been that for too many of our friends and neighbors, they don't see themselves in the NDP because they have these stereotypes of what the party is, which I don't think are really reflective of the membership or the caucus of the party today. So my job is to reach out to even more Albertans and help them see that, the conservative movement as it is today, Danielle Smith and her UCP, certainly is not conservative in any way. They are socially regressive. They are financially profligate. They are not investing in the things that the public really needs. I keep saying that I've known Danielle Smith for 30 years. We went to university together, and we took a class together, and the professor was a guy called Peter Lougheed.
Oh, wow.
And I feel like I was paying attention in that class. I'm not sure if she was, but I'm very comfortable in saying that Peter Lougheed would be very uncomfortable with this version of the conservative movement. I'm comfortable in saying that Ralph Klein, who I knew very well, would be uncomfortable in this version of the conservative movement. And in fact, the kind of competent, pragmatic government that Albertans are used to is now much better reflected by the NDP than it ever will be by this UCP and Danielle Smith.
So some say healthcare in Alberta is on the brink of collapse, while others say it has collapsed. Would you agree with the former or the latter? And what changes need to be made with AHS?
It's been on the brink of collapse for some time, and I would argue that in some areas in southern Alberta, it has in fact collapsed. If you cannot count on an ambulance being there when you call 911, or if you cannot count on your emergency room actually having staff to run an emergency room, that's not an effective working healthcare system. And now this is a tough one because when you ask the Premier, what's the core problem with healthcare? She's sort of like an onion. You have to peel off layers until she gets to her answer. And the final answer for her on healthcare is, well, AHS spends too much on management. Now, never mind that AHS, when you benchmark it against any other organization, you will see that it actually spends less on management than other health organizations of its size. But what I don't understand at all is if she believes that AHS spends too much on management, then how is creating 4 AHSs, each with their own management layers, actually going to reduce the cost of management? In fact, I would argue that most Albertans would not disagree that AHS needs reform. But I don't think any Albertans would agree, and Danielle Smith and Adriana LaGrange are trusted to do it. It's no doubt that what they do, I have very little faith it's going to work. But here's the issue. If the NDP takes power in 2027, 3 years from now, and we look at an exhausted healthcare workforce, and we say you've just been through this terrible organizational change that nearly killed you, let's do it again. Well, that's not going to work either. And so we have to deal with what we inherited. Part of it is we've got to find the money to adequately fund the system. It's as simple as that. We cannot continue to starve the system and expect the people who work in the system to do heroic things every day, using literally Band-Aids to keep it all together forever and ever. We're going to burn people out. We have burned people out. We're seeing people leave the province in droves in the healthcare professions. So we have to start with funding the system adequately and finding the money to do that. But we also need to start from a place of respect.
We need to take a short break, but when we return, we'll bring you more from our interview with Naheed Nenshi. Welcome back. Within the first week of Naheed Nenshi joining the NDP leadership race, the party's membership doubled, which is a testament to his popularity. But what would the party look like under his leadership? Here is part 2 of Naveen Day's interview with former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi.
We really have to move to a place where we're inviting more Albertans into the conversation. There is the largest opposition caucus in history. Most of them are new. They are brilliant. They are smart. They are capable. They are looking forward for Alberta. And now what we have to do is a bunch of stuff on the inside to make sure that we are a strong organization that really knows how to speak to Albertans. But more public facing, we have to understand that when we're in opposition, we have to really help Albertans understand what's really going on in the community. The government's not listening to us. And yes, we're there to oppose them, but we have to use our powers to really tell the story to Albertans about how we can build a better community together. I don't think the fundamental values of the party need to change at all. This is not a takeover. The party does not need a savior. 750,000 people voted for it in the last election, and they came achingly close to forming a majority government. But what we really need to do is invite many, many more Albertans into the conversation, into this coalition that is today's Alberta NDP. And, I will tell you that we have massively increased the membership of the party over the course of this leadership race. It's much higher now than it has ever been. Thousands of Albertans are signing up to volunteer with the party. We've got just a week left as we record this to the membership deadline. You have to have a membership by Monday, April 22nd in order to vote in the leadership race. Most people don't know that. And I think that this movement will be very exciting because the big thing for me over the last 5 weeks since I launched my campaign is the level of interest and excitement that we've seen from Albertans. That standing room only room in Lethbridge has been replicated across the province. And I know better than to know that people are excited because of this handsome face. They're excited because for the first time in politics in a long time, people feel like they've been given the permission to dream of something better. Our politics here and everywhere over the last decade have been defensive and divisive. Hold on to every crumb we've got, be scared of what's coming down the line, be scared of people that are different than us with different ideas. And so many Albertans, young and old and throughout the community, have come to me over the last month and said, thank you for giving me a reason to hope for a better Alberta. And in Lethbridge, we know one thing. It is impossible to have small dreams when the sky is that big. And so to me, that's what we need to turn around, get people excited about Alberta taking its forefront in the world as a leader for the world on climate, on energy, on sustainability, on how we live and work together in a pluralistic society. Alberta needs to be a role model for the world. We've done it in the past, we can do it again, and I hope that that's the kind of dialogue that we'll have over the next 3 years and into the next government.
And let's just talk about the provincial election, which is not until 2027, which gives you quite a bit of time to talk to people and make an influence. Should you take the helm of the Alberta NDP, what will it take to unseat Premier Danielle Smith and the UCP?
Look, I've known Danielle Smith for 30 years. I know how to get under her skin. I will call her out every single time. But at the same time, I will do so in a way that helps Albertans understand that something better is possible. So, we're going to spend I'm going to use a lot of miles on that old Toyota Camry of mine. We are going to be out in the communities across Alberta a lot. We're going to understand that it's not Calgary, Edmonton, and rural Alberta, but it is thriving communities of different sizes everywhere in the province, and really talking to people in their living rooms and at football games and in coffee shops and Rotary clubs, really helping folks understand that we can build together a better vision for the community. My slogan of my campaign is "For Alberta, for all of us." And I've been surprised that the power of that slogan in people's minds has not been the word Alberta or the word all, but it's actually been that little tiny word for, F-O-R.
Really?
Because we've been conditioned for so long to be against things. To be against environmentalists, to be against activists, to be against Ottawa, to be against Trudeau and Stephen Guilbeault, to be against LGBTQ kids, to be against people who worship differently. In short, just to be against frontline workers and nurses and doctors and teachers. In short, to be against each other. And so many people have said to me, that's not my Alberta. That's not what Alberta is about. And it's time for us to be for one another again.
It's nearly the end of the school year, and that usually means gowns, crowns, and those hard decisions about what to do after high school. Well, we have some answers coming up after the break. Welcome back. We're closing in on the end of the school year, and grad season is just around the corner, and that can sometimes mean big purchases for mom and dad. But one nonprofit is again helping students suit up for the big day this year without breaking the bank. If you've ever had to shop for formal wear, like a grad or a prom, you know just how high the prices of dresses and suits have gotten these days, not to mention all the added accessories like shoes, jewelry, purses. And when it's an outfit you know you'll only wear once, it makes the purchase that much harder to bear. But what if we told you there's a place right here in town where you can shop till your heart's content and it's all free? Enter the Cinderella Project and Tux Shop. Tanya Lister is the project coordinator.
So the Cinderella Project is a program that was designed to step in and meet a need that we saw in our community. We discovered that there are children in our city who were choosing not to attend their grade 12 graduations because they weren't able to afford formal wear to be able to fit in with their peers. And so the Cinderella Project and Tux Shop was born.
Providing a boutique-like experience for the students, families must register, and a 1-hour appointment time is set up just for them, one-on-one with a personal shopper. Lister explains that all the items in the boutique are donated, most are used, some are new, and all are free.
So from the students, usually the reaction is surprise. They're not sure what to expect. Often when they come in for their appointment, they are a little bit nervous or a little bit hesitant. And it's really a cool space to see the confidence grow in them as they go throughout the appointment. For the parents, we just see relief and often gratitude as well, because this was something that they didn't know was going to be able to happen, right? And so we want to be able to relieve that burden from them so that they're able to celebrate and enjoy grad alongside with their child.
The project began 8 years ago through My City Care, a nonprofit clothing bank.
So there's lots of different ways that people in our local community can partner with My City Care. We are always looking for monetary donations to help us with cost associated with running a program. So for Cinderella Project, we have running costs, as well as we also take care of alterations. We're also looking for donations of grad dresses, and especially men's suits and men's dress shoes are two items that we definitely need donated into our space for this year. This program is to bring confidence and dignity and respect to these students so that they can move forward into their next steps, feeling confident in the hard work that they've put into this and just their best. Yeah, there's been tears in here for sure.
For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Roche. And once those students graduate, well, they need to think about a career, don't they? Career transitions could help with that, as they gave students from an array of Lethbridge secondary schools some hands-on experience at a variety of work trades this week. BCN's Naveen Day was at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center to see a unique concept called career speed dating.
Career Transitions is an organization that works with 67 schools in southwestern Alberta. Their goal is to introduce students to careers and occupations to arm them with information to make course selection and career choices once they graduate high school. On Wednesday, they held their EPIC Day, which stands for Exploring Possible Industries and Careers. Executive Director for Career Transitions Judy Stolk-Ingram says the event helps young people expand their horizon of possibilities.
We just want students to be aware that there are so many different occupations out there that they haven't, that they might not know about, and to start to think about what resonates for them, so that hopefully as they go through high school, they can start making the best possible choices for themselves.
Students are placed in one of 11 zones, just like the one behind me, each filled with organizations from a variety of fields such as trades, health, STEM, agriculture and environment, and one wild card field. Then the students are divided into groups of 6 and spend 20 minutes with each organization to see what they have to offer. Stolk-Ingram calls this concept career speed dating, and she says the feedback from students has been positive.
I didn't know that really I could change careers, which is really important, right? Nobody has to make a decision when they're 15 as to what they're going to retire from. Other feedback is, like, I didn't know there were so many options out there. I didn't know anything about trades. I didn't know that you could pay your way.
The event is funded through school divisions, post-secondary institutions, as well as corporate sponsors. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
The average Canadian spends more than they earn, and unfortunately, that trend seems to be increasing, not decreasing. After the break, we speak with an expert about getting out of debt.